Okay, hello everyone, this is Chris with Fischer Workshops. In today's video, I just want to briefly introduce you to what I think are some essential tools that you should have if you're going to be doing hand stitching. And some of you who are new to leathercraft probably have a hard time getting familiar with a lot of the tools that are available. But I hope this video will come in handy and give you an idea of where you should begin, what tools are really essential, where you really want to first start off with investing a little bit of money so that you can get some great results and enjoy the process quickly. So here, our first tool I want to introduce to you guys is a stitching horse, or also called a stitching pony. And on the bottom, you'll see at the base of the stitching pony is this little platform that extends out. This is what's really designed to put on a chair, and you wrap your legs over this, and this rests between your legs. And you can clamp your project into the teeth at the top, and there is a hinge right here that allows you to extend this and to open it up. And in that opening, you can put a piece of leather or whatever it is you're going to be stitching, and you tighten it to clamp that piece, and you can go ahead and stitch. This is a really easy device to use, and if you're working with a shorter piece, these can come out and you can readjust the bolt and the washer like so. Now this particular pony I just quickly made myself. I have four of these devices. Sometimes I'm using 2 or 3 at one time on really large projects. They would work great. I can clamp them to my bench on these sides if I want to stand up, or I can sit down on smaller projects and use it that way. So I use this all the time. I really believe this is a must-have tool if you're going to do hand stitching, because you need both hands to stitch with. Since we're working with 2 harness needles at the same time, you want both hands to be free to focus on the stitching. This tool will hold your work for you and make it a lot easier. These particular tools you can buy on Amazon, eBay, ETSY, and they go for anywhere from $20 to $40. Some can be really expensive, be over $100. It just depends. But I would say the ones that I've used that are the best you can purchase online have a swivel function down here. The neck can extend in several different directions. It has a really good clamp on it. It holds your work well. But you want to make sure, if you do buy one online, they may not give you this leather that's already attached here, and you definitely want to adhere a piece of leather over this clamp part, because it will damage the surface of this leather if you just use wood, and it'll leave that imprint onto your leather work that you don't want. So this will soften that up, so they'll clamp it, but it won't mar the edges. And next, obviously, is going to be you're going to need a hard surface to work with when you're punching stitching holes. And so I always just use this big slab of stone here. It's polished stone. You can pick these up at leather craft supply stores, or maybe at a tile supply store as well. This, I think, costs anywhere from $20 to $30. And then this kind of plastic or rubber pad, which I use to protect my tools with. You can see it's about 2 centimeters thick. You don't have to have it that thick. I think even 1 centimeter is thick enough. But this is used so when you're punching the holes, stitching holes into the leather, it won't damage the teeth or the prongs on these stitching chisels. So this is very important. Hard surface is very important. It's also weighted, so you have less resistance. So if you're just pounding on this board on top of a piece of wood table, it's going to shake a lot. It's going to be a lot louder. So this kind of deadens the sound, adds some weight to it. So definitely pick up one of those. Now, when you're prepping to stitch, of course, you're going to need something that's going to draw an accurate stitch line. And there are several tools that can do this. There's a wing divider. And this particular tool is great because you can just adjust the the teeth on this to whatever depth that you need it to be, and you just put it on your piece of leather. So if you want it to sit in that deep, you just do that, and now you have a stitch line. This is great for drawing stitch lines. It's great for creating circles with, if you're gonna do that. Another thing that people also use is just, this is from this particular model is made by Chisel, and this is a company out of Japan. And I'm not sure why, but this particular tool or this particular product, the stylus on the end is plated in 24 karat gold. And I think that's just for aesthetics, but it doesn't necessarily make it a better tool. So this one here, you can do the same. You adjust the depth. It looks like it's about the same as I just had that wing divider at. And it does a really nice job of drawing a stitch line for you. Or if you just want to do some decorative stylus work on your leather, you can use this tool too. You can change these heads by unscrewing these. And here's one I got early on from Tandy Leather. It's been a great little tool, and it's worked nice for me. This is a stitch groover, and it has the same thing. It has like a stylus tip, or you can switch it and you have a groover as well. And so what you're gonna use a groover for is when you wanna make a well in the leather, and this will actually carve a line with a well in it. And so we have a little excess leather there that we take off. And what that does is when you punch your stitching hole, so I'll take a stitching chisel here, and that tool just makes a nice little well for those stitch holes to rest into. So when you stitch this, especially if you're using a thicker thread, which is often used in leathercraft, it'll rest into that well, so you have a very straight stitch. So even if you're using a diamond shaped chisel, you're not going to have that diamond movement if you're using a well. It's going to just rest into that and fill up that well and create a very straight stitch. And that's really nice too. You don't have to do that, but that's the function of that particular tool. And these tools here cost about anywhere from $10 to $40, just depending on the brand, the quality of the tool. This one I think has been a great tool. I've had it for 5 or 6 years. I sharpen it once in a while, but it's worked excellent all the time that I've had it. And I think I spent maybe $15, $16 for it. And this one here, also a really great high quality tool. It's built a little bit better than the one that I got at Tandy, and this is from Japan. Obviously it's got the 24 karat gold tip on it, which serves no purpose other than to look pretty. And it cost about $35, okay? So those are the tools there. Now, other thing is stitching chisels. I'm probably not going to satisfy everybody with my introduction on this, but this is just, again, more just to introduce you to what the tools do, what they are. There are such an array of different qualities, sizes of stitching chisels out there that you can go online and shop. And I'm just using the most basic ones that you usually start out with. And these are 3mm size. They have a 3mm gap between the prongs. And I bought this, I think, from Tandy Leather originally. And you know, it does what it's supposed to do. It punches a stitching hole for you. The holes are a little bit large. And what you do is you punch a couple of holes, and you go back to the last hole that was punched in line, and you line that up with the first prong on the stitching chisel, and then you continue to punch away. And then I have this plastic board beneath it, and it protects my teeth, and this is where the teeth are coming out on the other side. And this is about a 9 to 10 ounce piece of leather. And you can do that way. And these can be very cheap to very expensive. These are just the basic stitching chisels, but they're strong. I haven't had them break. The only thing you don't want to do is drop them, and if this prong hits something hard from a high enough height, it will bend it, and that will offset the teeth on here. So you definitely want to protect these and be careful not to drop them, because they can get damaged, and they are a little bit expensive. And what you want to look for when you're buying stitching prongs is, are they polished well? You want to look inside each prong, and is it really rough inside? If it's really, really rough, it's probably not going to come out of the leather very easily. And the thicker the amount of leather, say you've got 2, 3, 4 layers of leather, you know, and you want to punch through all of them without using what I'll introduce later, which is a stitching awl. And the purpose of the stitching awl is to, you first punch the stitching hole, and then you press the rest of the way through with one of these blades. And this is a diamond shaped stitching awl. It's similar to the shape of the chisel itself, and I can puncture the rest of the way through with that. I rarely use these because I have another way to get around it, but a lot of other crafters still really use this. But once in a while I'll use a stitching awl, but you'll notice in my videos that I don't often use this. And I think one of the other concerns is the thicker the layer of leather, the higher the probability is that it looks good on one side, but maybe the holes will be, the depth will be different on the back side. And that's just because it's so thick, and maybe your stitching chisel is angled, and it's not perfectly straight, which is hard to do when you're dealing with really thick leather. But on 1-ply leather, no problem. You're going to get a very balanced depth, but again, the thicker the leather, you're going to have problems with that. So when you're shopping for these, you can expect to pay anywhere from $10 for each chisel to much less than that. Say you live in New York and you live in an apartment, and your neighbor hates you because you're always banging on this and doing your leather craft. Well, there's this kind of tool, if that's the case, and it has teeth on both ends. This is a 4-prong. I basically only buy a 4-prong and a 1-prong. I've never really had a lot of need for the 2-prong or the 3-prong, so this works out good for me. And what you do, especially, this is especially excellent, even if you don't have noise issues to deal with, but you just have a product with 2 sides where you want the stitched lines to look, the depth to be perfect on both ends. So you can draw a stitch line on both ends, and so we'll go ahead and do that just briefly to demonstrate. So I have a groove on the back side, and I have a groove on the front. And you can take these pliers, they're built really, really well. They're really strong. You line up the teeth in the well on the front and the well on the back, and you just gently pinch, and you have your stitch hole. And again, you do it the same way with the stitching chisel. You just line it up with that last hole that was punched with your first prong on your chisel, and you punch that again. I'll do it one more time so you can see. And both sides are perfectly lined up. And this is in my opinion a must-have tool if you're going to be doing something where you want your hand stitching just to look like a machine did it, have it perfectly lined up. You can do that with these. And you'll use the 1-prong obviously when you're doing corners. And this one is I purchased from Chisel. There are other companies that sell these from China. Here Tandy Leather also sells them as well. And what you can do, I buy stitching chisels that match the depth and the distance of the prongs as these, as you can tell. And if I'm going on a corner, I'll just use this to kind of mark where my next line, where my next hole is going to be, because the 4 maybe it's too much for a corner, and then I can just use this single hole punch to mark the others. Like that. So I think this is a must-have tool. I wanted to include this one. This works great, but it gets damaged very, very easily. So this is a cheaper version of this tool right here. And both do the same job, but this one costs maybe $12. This one here costs about $40 to $50 a piece. So depending on the brand and who you buy it from. I've bought in some of these before, and they're terrible. So make sure that the spacing between these is good. Some of them make these way too big, the teeth way too big, and the holes come out looking messy. This one is done really well, and it's a nice one. But as you can see, this is a single hole. punches a hole for you as well. The problem with this, and I don't know if the camera can quite capture it, these teeth should meet but not overlap. What happens is because these are made out of a really cheap metal, when they connect, it bends these teeth, and it's really hard to gauge your power with this when you're piercing, you're puncturing the leather with it. So as you can tell, you just kind of, you feel it go through and it lock, but it's really hard to control the strength. So I've damaged every single one of these I've ever bought, probably within the first or second project I use them in, and it just starts to get messy at that point. So I don't recommend this. You can use it, you gotta be really careful not to damage the teeth if you do. And of course, your thread and your stitching wax. I included this because I know this isn't a tool, this is a product, but I just think, you know, you should always have some beeswax on hand in case you're going to be using linen thread. Some of the threads you buy in leather craft store are already pre-waxed, but this particular thread, if you're using linen, it's great to just have some wax around to run over the thread with. It'll keep it from entangling. It'll also protect the thread as you're stitching and give it a little more longevity in your product. So it'll keep it clean, and this is just an important product to have around. Now, of course, you also have stitching awl. I just introduced this to you, and that's if you're as you're stitching, you've already pre-punched some holes, but they don't pierce all the way through the leather. You can use a stitching awl, and this will punch through it. The stitching awl basically just is sharp on two ends, and it has a pointed tip in the shape of a diamond, and it creates the same effect. There are different sizes of stitching awls that you can buy. When I bought this one, it was blunt, so I had to sharpen it by hand. You can buy them that are pre-sharpened, but you do need to keep these stropped regularly, just like you would with most of your blades. And I hope to do a video on tools for cutting leather with, because I have a lot of good tips on that as well. So I'll come up with that, but today I just want to focus on tools for stitching. So again, I don't use this very often because I kind of substitute this with one of these hand stitching pliers, and that's just, I found it convenient. Now, the only problem with these is these are not going to punch anything with bigger than that. So if your product is going to be thicker than that, you're going to have to rely on a stitching awl or use another device, which sometimes I use a drill press actually to cut my stitching holes with really thick leather. And of course, you always need a mallet. You can use a wood mallet. This is a rawhide mallet. There's also poly mallets made out of a polymer, and they're all good. They all work. This will last a long time. I've been using this hammer for a couple of years. It's been really good. It cost about $25. It's got a little weight to it, but very good for just basic leathercraft needs. And this is a scratch awl here. And basically I use this more for cutting, tracing patterns onto my leather with, but it's also useful sometimes for stitching as well. So it can almost be used like an awl. It's not the same, but it can also help if you have a hole that's maybe too tight and you can't get your needle through. You can just kind of push that through and it'll kind of open up the hole for you, but it won't make it look messy. And of course, again, there are different types of harness needles. There's different sizes depending on how fine the leather work that you're doing. So make sure to buy a needle that fits your leather work. Those are the essential tools I'd say that you need to get started with hand stitching. If you got these tools, you should be set to be able to do just about anything you want to do with hand stitching. Of course, though, if you have questions, if you have comments, or even recommendations, if you see something that I may have missed in this video that you think would be really helpful to the community, I really appreciate your comments and your questions below. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to check us out on YouTube. And if you would like to get updates on our latest video releases, don't forget to subscribe to Fischer Workshop's YouTube channel. Thank you.